Welcome to another episode of Medicine 3.0, your place for AI in medicine, precision medicine. And this week I have Trevor Connor. He is the CEO of the paleodiet.com. He obviously loves the paleo diet. He studied it at Colorado State, and we had just a great conversation. And if you've heard me talk much about nutrition, you probably know that I don't necessarily adhere to one diet strictly. And what was interesting is digging in with Trevor. He believes that there's some flexibility there, but doing what works for you, eating real whole foods. And I think he had some great stories, some great examples. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Sit back, relax, enjoy. All right, Trevor, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited. I'm sure that my audience is excited to learn more about you, but why don't we start with you telling me how you got where you're at, knowing what you know?
That's a big question, but it's a good question. So my background was as a professional cyclist, and I really got into physiology and nutrition to help my cycling. Found that I really enjoyed it. So originally it was just kind of let's learn about this so I can be a faster cyclist. But then discovered, hey, this is a lot of fun. So wanted to pursue it further. I ended up doing my graduate work at Colorado State University. And my first semester there, it was a required course. I had to take the Paleo diet course with Dr. Loren Cordain, who was the originator of the Paleo diet, the founder. And coming from a traditional sports nutrition background, I sat there in the class just angry because everything he was teaching me, I'm like, yeah, this is wrong. This is not what I learned. He can't be right about this stuff. I was so angry about it. I took the course in the spring. I spent the summer trying to prove him wrong. And as I would go through the research saying, he's got to be wrong about this. So let's see what the research says. I'd kind of go through the research and go, well, actually, that makes sense. But then I go, he's got to be wrong about this. And I'd look at that and look at the research and go, well, actually, that kind of makes sense too. And over the course of about 6 months, without really even knowing it, I ended up going on the paleo diet, which was very contradictory to what I had been taught in sports nutrition, which was consume as much simple sugar as you can possibly eat.
Mm-hmm.
I was 38 at the time. I had given up on professional cycling because I just didn't feel my body could handle it anymore. That winter, even though I was in school, I had a coaching business. I was training better than I had in years. Went to Canadian Nationals at 39 and just missed third place. They caught me right on the line. Next year, I went back to racing professionally and for a brief period was ranked top 10 in the country at 40.
Wow.
So that was kind of what led me to say, there's something to this. There's something that really works. So I asked Dr. Cordain to be my advisor, and I've worked with him ever since.
That's awesome. I'm curious, you mentioned kind of one major difference between what you'd been taught and what you learned from Dr. Cordain. But what were the things as you listened to his lectures that you're like, that's got to be wrong? And then as you researched it, you realized actually it's not.
The biggest one was definitely the simple sugars and carbohydrates. You're taught in sports nutrition, you should be eating 65, 70% carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically what you should be focusing on. Then maybe making sure you're getting enough protein for recovery, and then fat is just something you shouldn't even worry about. There's also just a mentality, and it still exists right now. I have my own podcast. We brought on a PhD in nutrition on an episode not just a few weeks ago, who started the episode by saying it is a myth that simple sugar is bad for you. And went into why simple sugar is actually good for you. And obviously not something I believe. It was an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
But that really was what you were taught in sports nutrition, that get the carbohydrates, get the simple sugars, they are good for you. And when Dr. Cordain was teaching us, actually, there's healthy fats and you need a lot of fats. Carbohydrates, these simple sugars that are bad for you, you need to make sure they're not in your diet. I really struggled with it. It was completely contrary to how I'd been eating for years.
Right.
But the interesting thing there was my last couple of years racing professionally, I was getting sick all the time. And, it was weird because it would be this low-grade illness that would last a couple of weeks, but, there wasn't a bug going around. I hadn't been exposed to anything, so I didn't know why I kept getting sick. When I switched to the paleo diet, that went away. I just stopped getting sick.
Interesting. Do you, so I'm curious when you think about kind of you had this PhD on that talked about simple sugars, and
Yep.
I've had a few PhD dietitians on as well, and all working with high performance athletes, and so I'm curious what you think about the difference, just general nutrition, the way that you think about it for non-athletes or people who are just athletes of their lives who do a 30-minute run in the morning, but they're not training like crazy or trying to break new records. Do you think about nutrition any differently when it comes to high performance versus everyday people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say if you had asked me that question 15, 20 years ago, I would say, of course, the nutrition's completely different. I have been going more and more towards actually, I think just eating healthy is the right approach for everybody.
Yeah.
Even when I was performing at a high level, when I went back to racing professionally for a few years, the way I was eating then and found really helped my performance is no different from how I'd be eating now. It's just now I'm not training 6 hours every day, so I don't need to eat as much. But the composition of what I'm eating wouldn't change.
Hmm.
And I could see my teammates struggle with that. We'd go to races, and the night before every race, they're doing the giant pasta party. I'm having salmon with vegetables.
Uh-huh.
And they just sit there and go, Trevor, you're doing this wrong. You're not going to be able to perform tomorrow. And then you'd have the race the next day, and I'd be in the lead group, and a lot of them would be pulling out of the race. And I'd go back and go, maybe you should try some salmon.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they just go
It's
ahead.
fascinating. I feel like we are learning more and more about kind of intramuscular fat stores
Yep.
and the need of those stores to perform long endurance races. So w- when you say paleo, I just want to make sure everybody understands. Kind of define that for people how you eat differently than maybe the general American.
So the simplest way to define the paleo diet is it is eating the foods that we evolved around. Now, obviously, a lot of those foods don't exist anymore, which is a fair criticism. So we're trying to approximate it. We can't eat exactly the way we did 100,000 years ago. So what that means is a lot of fruits, vegetables, high quality meats, fish, nuts, and seeds. Where the diet gets controversial is, grains and dairy have only really been introduced to our diet from an evolutionary perspective very recently. Our
Hmm.
bodies haven't adapted to those. So what we're really recommending is either get those out of your diet or get them mostly out of your diet. I
Hmm.
don't ever tell anybody to be 100% unless they're dealing with an autoimmune disease or a condition where you really just have to stop eating those things.
Right.
Um, the other sides of it is just eat less processed.
Mm.
And quite, I'm sure you've seen this in the research. More and more in the research, they're talking about ultra processed, processed, minimally processed, and unprocessed foods. So they have those four categories.
Yep.
And when you look at people that eat a lot of ultra processed and processed foods, you see a lot more correlation with all cause mortality with a variety of illnesses. So really, what you see in the research is a push towards eat more unprocessed and minimally processed foods. And the
Hmm.
argument I always make is if you're going to eat an unprocessed or minimally processed diet, it by necessity has to be a paleo diet
Hmm.
because you can't eat grains unprocessed. And most
Very
people can't
difficult.
handle dairy unprocessed.
Yeah.
So, and then the last side of it is just nutrient density. Um, when you are eating less processed foods, when you're eating fruits, vegetables, high quality meats, fish, they're packed with nutrients, a whole mix of nutrients. When you're eating something in a box off of the shelves, it might have a lot of calories in it, but it's usually pretty low nutritional value.
Yep.
So that's kind of the paleo diet in a nutshell. It's actually pretty simple.
So you don't think all those vitamins they add into Captain Crunch are helpful for me?
So this is correlational, and you always have to be careful with correlations. But there have been multiple studies. There was actually a meta-analysis that came out just recently looking at people who take multivitamins
Yeah.
and showed that they live a shorter life and have a higher correlation, again, with a variety of conditions. So I'm not going to say that taking a multivitamin is bad for you and going to make you sick. I think more what's going on is the people that take a lot of multivitamins are compensating for a bad diet.
Hmm.
But what that research is showing is no, it doesn't compensate. If you're
Yeah.
eating a bad diet and say, well, I'll get all my nutrients from a multivitamin it's just not panning out. The only way you can get the nutrients you need is by eating nutrient dense, healthy, natural foods.
Right. Right. So I'm curious, the general American diet is highly processed foods.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it seems that it continues to go in that path. I think we've got a growing niche of people that want to eat less processed, higher quality, nutrient dense foods. It's, people listen to your podcast, people listen to my podcast.
Yep.
But when somebody comes to you and they're kind of on the standard, the standard American diet, how do you start working with them to get them to change to what you think is a better diet?
It's cut them a break. So this is where I take my experience as a coach. So I was a cycling coach for 15 years. I still do some coaching. And the thing you would never do with if you have a new athlete that's coming off the couch, the thing you would never do with them is say, okay, I'm going to give you a Tour de France athlete's training plan. It would kill them.
Yeah.
So you have to start gradually and build up. They might ultimately want to be a Tour de France athlete or go to national championships or whatever. But you always have to say, where are you now? Let's start there and just progress you and see where we can get you. And I think we need to take the same mentality with nutrition. People go, okay, I've been eating a really bad diet. I need to fix my diet. And they take that approach of, I'm going to go from off the couch to the Tour de France athlete's training plan. Don't. Slowly improve it. Let's talk about things that you can do better. Let's start getting some of the junk out of your diet. Start eating some fruits. Start eating some vegetables. But don't make the complete change tomorrow. A, your body's not going to respond well to it. Mm-hmm. And B, it's really hard to do because you're used to a particular way of eating. So I prefer to say, let's change slowly and let's celebrate every improvement.
Yeah, I love that. I completely agree that it's all about expanding comfort, right? Like your circle of comfort may be very small when you begin, and you have to expand that so that you can handle more and more. And so are there any like practical tips or anything that you've learned? Like, what is some low hanging fruit when you start with somebody and you say, okay, we're going to get you off the couch. We're going to start moving you on this path. What are some of your go-tos?
Well, nutritionally, my go-to would be start by adding healthier things into your diet. Mm-hmm. Start by getting some fruits. Start by getting some vegetables and a variety of fruits and vegetables. Start by getting a higher quality meat. And I'm sure you've talked about this as well. There's a big difference between a nice grass-fed steak and a McDonald's cheeseburger.
Yep.
And unfortunately, often in the research, they just kind of go, well, they're both protein, they're both meat, they're the same thing. They're not. There's a huge nutritional difference. But I would start by adding. And the reason I would start there is A, it's going to get you used to eating those foods because they aren't going to taste good at first. If you haven't been eating them, your body always responds negatively to change. So you can eat those things and go, oh, that's not great. But add them to your diet every day and then reward yourself with a cookie afterwards and start there at least. Mm-hmm. The other thing I've seen, a lot of people think hunger signals are kind of an on-off switch. You're hungry, so you eat something, then the hunger signals turn off. What I have seen and what I've read in the research is that you're actually usually hungry for something. Greatest example of this is when somebody's pregnant. They have these crazy cravings. I actually read a study where they said, let's take a look at those. And whatever that crazy craving was, that food was usually really high in a particular nutrient. And so what you're seeing is when somebody is pregnant, the baby gets priority. So they give whatever nutrients that are needed to grow the baby to the baby, which means the mother can actually become quite deficient in those nutrients. And so she starts getting these huge cravings. Often it's so then it's, all of a sudden she can't eat enough pickles, or I've actually heard about craving for tree bark, but it turns out the tree bark, as I remember, was really high in calcium or a particular nutrient. Mm-hmm. So there was an explanation to it. I think all of us have something that's a little less extreme. When we are hungry, our body's usually saying, I need this nutrient or I need that nutrient. And I think we've gotten really bad at hearing what those cravings are asking for. So if you just go and eat a low quality cheeseburger, which has 800 calories in it, your body's going to go, thank you, Appreciate that. I'll store the calories. But what I was actually looking for was some B6 and some B2, and you didn't give me any of that. So I'm not going to turn the hunger signals off.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why you hear about people putting down 1,000 calories and saying, I'm still hungry. So I'm sorry, I know there's a very long answer to your question, but I've noticed that when you start getting people to eat nutrient dense foods, they stop being as hungry. And the first response I always get is, wow, I'm eating half of what I used to eat, and yet I'm not hungry where I used to be hungry all the time.
Yeah. Well, I I think that so interesting hypothesis about the deficiency guiding your hunger. That is interesting. My sister-in-law always loved to eat soap when she was pregnant. And so I don't know, but maybe there was some sort of she would actually crunch on ice while she would smell soap because obviously you
Yeah.
shouldn't eat too much soap. What is absolutely true, right, is that those highly processed foods are so calorie dense and nutrient low
Right.
that the number of calories you can down. I mean, even let's take the cheeseburger example, a cheeseburger, fries, and you know, a shake at In-N-Out Burgers, and you're 1,500 calories in, and yeah, you're going to be hungry again in 3 or 4 hours, and
Yep.
so pretty insane compared to, let's even take calorie dense like salmon,
Yep.
and you take down 4 ounces of salmon and you do a bunch of greens and some legumes, some beans or something, and you're going to be super full, and your calorie count will be half of what it was. So
I had that exact conversation with my nephew. So this was when I was still in school with Dr. Cordain. My nephew at the time was 13, and he was well in the obesity category and really frustrated with it. And so he came to me and asked for my advice. And we had a conversation about what he eats. And I said to him, so tell me what you're having for lunch. And he goes, well, all my friends at school say I have a really healthy lunch. I go, so what is it? And he goes, well, I typically have 2 slices of pizza, Coke, and a Milky Way bar. And so my response immediately was, what are your friends eating if that's the
right.
healthy lunch? But I sat down with him. I actually pulled out a app to that counts calories and nutrients. You've probably heard of Chronometer, which I
Yep.
love because
Yep.
it tracks all your nutrients. So I did exactly that. I laid out a lunch where he had a piece of salmon and a really big salad with a bunch of vegetables in it. And I made it insanely large. So I said, could you eat this? And he goes, no, that's huge. I don't think I could even eat all that. And showed him that lunch was about 500 calories. And then we plugged in what he eats. And I go, are you still hungry at the end of eating this? He goes, yeah. And I go, here you go. This is 1,100 calories. And he took it to heart. And 6 months later, he was skinny and got into cycling and actually tried to become a professional cyclist himself.
Oh, that's so cool. I love stories like that.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask you for if you had any kind of inspirational or success stories that you've had, and you gave us one for free. Any other stories that you'd like to share?
Well, that's my favorite. And I just won't share the part about when he went to college and discovered beer. Took a bit of the inspiration away.
Yeah, it's true.
But I mean, I've had that story with a lot of people where
Mm-hmm.
they are struggling. They say they're hungry all the time, even though they're eating tons of calories. And when I have that conversation with them about nutrient density and do the same thing where I lay out a much more nutrient dense meal and they go and try it, I always get the same response of I'm eating half of what I used to eat and I'm actually full. And it's the first time I've been full in a while. And
Yeah.
I love that story because I think so many people out there, when they're trying to help people with their nutrition, make it very, very complicated.
Yep.
And I think when you can just make it really simple and just say, just eat nutrient density, people can wrap their head around that, and it really helps. And I see the same thing on the sports side. I see coaches that try to give these insanely complex plans to their athletes, and it inevitably fails. If you can get the training down to something really simple. And look, I'm saying this, I have coached professionals, I have coached athletes that have gone over to Europe, done the Tour de France, and I still try to keep their training plans really simple, and it tends to be more successful. So I'd say the same thing with nutrition. The simpler you can make it, the better chance you have that people are going to stick with it and feel success from it.
Yeah. When when you have somebody that kind of buys in and says, "Hey, I want to do this, but there are certain things I don't want to give up. Like I still want to eat birthday cake, and I still want
Mhm.
to, you know, have donut once a week, or like, do you give them a hard time, or do you mostly just say, if you're 90% of the way there and you're not having any ill side effects from those other things, that's okay? Or how do you kind of approach that with somebody?
Absolutely. I'll actually flip that around and say, I think when anybody tries to be 100%, they inevitably fail.
Hmm.
And so here I'll share a story with you that's a little less inspirational, but kind of a good example of this. And I won't use names, but I know fairly well another website that really promotes the paleo diet. And I had a friend who worked there. And she said she really didn't like working there because they were paleo. She described them as paleo Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
You had to be 100%. And if you weren't 100%, they were going to get on your case about you were breaking the rules. But
Mm.
I watched their website, and what was really interesting is they started modifying the rules of the diet. So now
Mm.
all of a sudden, you can eat cake. If you make it with honey and you make it with almond flour, it's now healthy.
Uh-huh.
And suddenly, most of the recipes on their website were paleo cake and paleo cookies and paleo,
Yep.
all this kind of junk. And I look at that and go, cake's great. I love having my pieces of cake. Cake isn't healthy for you, and don't try to convince yourself it is just because it's made with honey.
Right.
Instead, just have the cake and enjoy it.
Yeah.
If you're having a giant piece of cake every day, that's probably not good for you. But if every once in a while you're having a piece of cake, just have it, enjoy it, and don't beat up on yourself.
Yeah. It's fascinating. You see this with paleo, you've seen this with keto. Like, the biggest growth in industry around highly refined, highly processed foods for these specialized diets that are supposed to help you be eating more like whole foods, which I think is just kind of fascinating to watch. But business knows where to find the money, and the money is
Yes.
in those areas.
Yeah, it's the substitute foods. And I have issues with that because then it just complicates things, and everybody's going to go towards the substitute foods and ultimately be disappointed because they're still
Yeah.
eating things that are high calorie, low nutrient density, that's going to spike insulin, cause all these issues. And then they're going to go, I tried this diet, it didn't work for me. What's going on? So I'm going to say, put the paleo diet aside. I'm just going to talk about what the research says. And if you really want to eat a healthy diet, you have to move towards less processed to unprocessed, nutrient dense foods. If you truly want to be healthy, eat vegetables, eat fruits, eat those higher quality meats, eat the fish, eat nuts and seeds, but be sparing with them because they are so high in calories. And there's
Hmm.
just no way around it. If you're having paleo cake and paleo bread and all the, just and paleo pasta and all this every day, you're kind of missing the biggest gains.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when you look at processing of foods. And I think one of the easiest examples is just like orange juice, right?
Yep.
Like, if you're going to drink a glass of orange juice, say that takes 8 oranges. But if you were going to eat 8 oranges, you'd eat 3 of them and be like, oh my gosh, I've had enough oranges. But
Right.
you can down that glass of orange juice, no problem.
Yep. And I
And
hate to say it, I'm sure you've seen this. There's been a lot of research looking at the negative impact on sugar on our health.
right,
And most of that research does it by having the subjects consume fruit juices.
right,
And so they'll have them consume fruit juices. They'll also have them consume things like Coke and Pepsi and a lot of the soft drinks. And the negative effects you see from fruit juice are about on par with what you see from drinking soft drinks. And it's
right.
not a good picture. Like neurodegeneration, the correlation with Alzheimer's, conditions like that is extraordinary. So one of the best things anybody can do with their diet is just get those sugary drinks, which includes fruit juices, out of
Yep.
your diet.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder, do you have any, like, what are your go-tos just for you personally? Like, what are your go-to foods that you kind of love and you're like, these are great foods?
I do like variety for sure. I'm going to qualify all this by saying I am a horrible cook. So I always tell people I can tell you what to eat, just don't ask me how to prepare it. So Where I've kind of landed, I know this isn't quite answering your question, but for me, what's most important, because I do run two businesses, I work a lot of hours, is making it easy to do.
Yeah.
I just don't have an hour to cook dinner every night. So my go-to is actually on Sunday nights, I grill up a whole bunch of food. So I'll grill some steaks, some chicken, a whole bunch of fish, just a mix of those proteins. And I'll put
Yep.
some in the fridge. I'll freeze others. And then most of my meals through the week are I'll grab a piece of meat or a piece of chicken or whatever, mix it with a whole ton of vegetables. And I love doing different vegetables every night. Just saute it in some olive oil, use some different spices, maybe some, I have my own sauces that I make, but basically just stir fry it and just kind of make a different stir fry every night. Gets a little boring sometimes, but it's easy, it's convenient, and I've learned how to make it taste good.
I mean, it sounds like you're a pretty good cook. You got your own sauces. You've got, specialty stir fry every night. Sounds
Uh,
pretty awesome.
my partner has tried it a few times and just kind of gone, yeah, no, but I like it, so
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Well,
works.
I think having, high quality proteins prepped all the time is just a great
Yes.
hack. I have a bunch of grilled chicken in my fridge that's frozen or in my freezer that, I meal prep every weekend, and then any leftovers I have, if I haven't eaten them by like Thursday and I'm afraid they're going to go bad, I throw them in the freezer, and then they're
Yep.
there for me on the days when I don't have time.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think make it convenient. If you're cooking it, if you're eating some sort of protein every night and you're cooking each one each night, that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Just getting it
Yeah.
all done at once really helps.
Yeah. So, Trevor, I think your overall message, I love, I think people hear paleo and they think there's no flexibility.
Right.
And I think what you're really preaching is, you're going to get better at this. You're going to get more comfortable, take it slow. Where can people find you, find resources from you, and learn more from you?
Yep. So obviously there's all the books that Dr. Cordain wrote. The whole paleo diet started with the book that he called The Paleo Diet. And I still love that book. Dr. Cordain, if you don't know, he is a scientist through and through. He came up with this basically just spending 10 years reading the research and said, here's what the research says. And when he first wrote the book, as I remember, the original title was A More Natural Human Diet Based on Ethnographic Paleolithic Data, to which the publishers went, yeah, no. And by the way, rewrite half of that book because nobody's going to understand it. So it became the Paleo Diet, and that's how it all started. And I still think the books are great. But we have a website. It's just thepaleodiet.com. We know what people really struggle with is finding some variety, finding things to eat. So we put a lot of focus on just some good paleo recipes. We have multiple recipe writers, and then we try to get some good information up there about the diet. And we've been creating some PDFs. We have a 7-day meal plan, a 28-day meal plan, a grocery list. We're trying to do a lot just to make this really easy for people.
That's awesome. I love it. I love you're passionate about it, and I love all the work that you've done on it. So thank you so much, Trevor.
Well, I really appreciate this and really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks. Thank you for listening to another episode of Medicine 3.0. We make this podcast so that you know where to turn for good information on keeping you and your loved ones healthy. Feel free to check us out at bionichealth.com, where we can help you live a longer, happier life.